So you're Anvita, and I see you have a couple of friends,
Yeah.
Katya and
Yeah.
Vidisha.
Yeah.
Katya, okay, and Vidisha. Nice to meet you both
Nice to meet
as
you.
well.
Too.
Nisha and I are the chief editors for the Vipers Voice. Vipers Voice is the International School of Hyderabad's official newspaper, and we are so glad that you have agreed to talk to us today. It is truly a pleasure.
You're welcome. So do you want to start a little bit with, I know you wanted to record, and I think you're recording now. So maybe I should just explain in my own words, like what I've done and how I ended up here. Is that helpful? Just take a 5 minutes.
Yes.
Sure. So my parents came to the United States in right after immigration law changed. When U.S. civil rights law changed in 1965, immigration law also changed here in the United States. And so I joined my dad. My mother and I came here in 1970. My father had come in 1969 to pursue higher education. He had studied at Andhra University in Vizag in Visakhapatnam, and his focus is on English literature, and also on philosophy. And so his goal was to come here and then go back to India. But then my mother and I came, and so my mother started studying here. So what was just supposed to be a few years became several years. And so we stayed here till 1981. So I had finished 10th grade, and we went back to Hyderabad, and I studied intermediate in Stanley Girls Junior College. And I had an American accent when I came back, and you'll find that my accent kind of switches back and forth. Anvita, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so when I stayed in India for 7 years, one of the things I realized is if I wanted to come back to the United States, my mother always said, America wants doctors and engineers. They're always, in looking for doctors and engineers. And so I came back as an engineer. I was good at math. It was my favorite subject in school. And so I went to first I tried to get into IIT. I took Agarwal training. I don't know if it still exists. But in 1981, 83, that time frame, I took the Agarwal training classes, couldn't get into IIT. So then I put my focus on getting in through the MSET, which was what it was called to get into engineering colleges in Andhra Pradesh, when it was Andhra Pradesh. And then I got into different schools. REC Warangal, when we did the interviews, I couldn't get in, even though I had a very high rank in the MSET, because I hadn't lived in India for 7 years. So they had this NRI rule, and like you couldn't go anywhere. And so I had to go. So the principal of RAC, when we did the interviews and the selection of my branch, he said, well, if you come here, depending on how you do in your first semester, first year, you can change branches. So I went initially into chemical because it was, even though I got like a really high rank, I couldn't get into like electronics or computer science or any of the other really like in demand branches in engineering. And so then in first year in REC, we did basic mechanical sciences and basic electrical sciences. And then I realized that I like mechanical because I like the engine. I like seeing things, that you build. Whereas electronics, I really didn't see. It wasn't something you can see, right? Like protons and neutrons and things like that. And so maybe it would have been a better career. A lot of my classmates who studied electronics and computer science did better financially, because that was the time of the IT boom, right? In the late 80s, early 90s. And so I came back to the US as a foreign student in 1988. So I went through the whole immigration process. And my parents, like every Indian family, wants their daughter to get married. I wasn't really interested in, I was so focused on trying to figure out who I was and figure out where I fit in the whole scheme of things, that it was hard for me. And so then I became, I was willing to meet the people they suggested just to humor them. But then I actually met someone that they suggested that I really liked in 1991. And he kind of understood like the challenges that I went through going back and forth, and like that I value our culture. I value my language. I value the food that I eat. They're my comfort foods, right? Like can't live without pulihara, right?
Yeah.
Can't live without aokai. Those are important. And so it's not just dosa and idli and chana and bhatura. It's there's a lot of other things that my mom made that I really and so the comfort foods, right? And so, but I knew that I wanted to stay in the United States because I understood how to be amongst people better. And so as we were figuring out, I said, but I also know that if there's a need for me to go to India, I'm happy to go to India because my parents live there, his parents live there. And so we did a lot of travel back and forth between the two countries because I grew up in this country without a whole lot of connection to family. And family is very important to me. My grandmothers both lived, were alive when I was born. I didn't have grandfathers alive when I was born. And so I was very close to both my grandmothers, especially my mother's mother, who taught me how to make like jantikalu and garalu and amarlu. Like she was really good at making peru garalu, so those kinds of things. And so when I celebrated Diwali with my cousins and, it's just a lot of fun. And so when I got married, that was one of the things that like, I wanted to be close to family. And he's also very oriented like towards his family. And his dad especially was like one of those people that, like in the family, there's always that one person that connects everybody. So my father-in-law was like that. He was really special. He passed away a few years ago. So I would go back and forth to India. I also knew that my mom, when my brother was born, he's a lot younger than me. She went back to work like 6 weeks after he was born. And I just felt so sad. Here's this little tiny, he was born when I was in 9th grade. And so I just felt so bad. Here's this little tiny baby and she has to go back to work. And like, I just felt sad that she wasn't there. So when my daughter was born, first I stayed home for like 3 months and then I worked part-time and flexible hours. And then when my son was born, not only did I stay home, I moved to Michigan. So my husband got a job in the auto industry and we saw the Chrysler building and I was like, I'm going to work at Chrysler. And eventually I did, but I stayed home. I did flexible jobs. I took the kids back and forth to India, but I volunteered because that was one of the things my parents always did was they like the commitment to seva. And so commitment to educate all children, even now, like my mom has a trust through her family, through my grandmother and grandfather's names, and we like help people get education. And so that's all I wanted to do. And so I volunteered a lot with the public schools because that's, I think, really special in America. No matter where you live, you go to your public school, you get an education, but it wasn't working, right? And if you lived in the United States, and so I felt like I had to fight for good public education to make sure that all children could have access, not just the people who have money, but for people to get out of poverty, you need to have an education. And so that's how I ended up volunteering a lot in different things. And eventually when I saw the need and the place where we make the most decisions about education are in the state legislature. And so when people asked me to run for something, I knew that this was where I wanted to be so that I could help address the need for public education. But once I came here, once I got elected, I realized that there's a whole lot more wrong than not funding public education properly and not putting, when you have your own budget as a family, you put your priorities. And that's why, your parents spend so much money to make sure you guys get an education. But we also have to put our money where our mouth is, like making sure everybody has access to clean water. I knew that when I lived in India that, not everybody has access to clean drinking water. Yeah. And so we live in the world's largest freshwater ecosystem is here in the state of Michigan.
Oh, wow.
We have 21% of the world's freshwater supply. And so I want to protect that. I don't want that to get polluted. And so the people that I wanted to work with were in the Democratic Party. And so that's why I became a Democrat. These are the values that I hold. And these are the values that the Democrats hold. So I became a Democrat and then I learned how to run for office. And that's what I've been doing since I got elected, is like working to help my constituents on whatever issue they care about, but also working to protect our drinking water, working to protect public education, and things like making sure women have access to equal pay. But yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. Your journey is such an amazing journey. And taking into consideration that you kind of shuffled between India and the United States like I did, this question is a little more special to me and a lot of other people at my school, since we do go to an international school. So I was wondering, how has shuffling between India and the United States affected your views on both countries, and how has it built you as the person you are today?
So I think I have, I will say first and foremost, I'm American. I actually took my oath of citizenship, unlike people who are born in the United States, as a naturalized citizen. And so I said that I would give up my life for America. So I always make fun of my kids and say, you're born here. I am an American, right? Because I said it was a choice. I actively became an American. And so I value that piece of my life very much. I think that is the promise of America, is that anyone can follow the Constitution and the laws. I think that culturally, though, I come from Indian heritage. I come from Telugu background, and I still speak Telugu. I can read Telugu, but I'm out of practice. Even my Telugu speaking has become a little rusty. But I think that the other thing is the religious practices. The idea that everyone has a path to the truth, that no one religion has the entire truth, that each person has to find it for themselves. And I think that it's not an either or attitude, it's a both and attitude. And I think that I can be American, but still appreciate the culture that I was raised in. And I think that's really important. India is my spiritual homeland, because if I think about all the places that I saw when I lived there, when I went back with my grandmother, like when I would go to temples with her, or the places I would go when I was in college. I had a roommate who was from Kerala. She's Catholic, but she and I would go to church together, and then we would go to the temple together right before exams to make sure that we had the blessings from, all the gods.
Yeah.
Right? From all the traditions and all the blessings, so that we would do well in our exams. So I think that's another thing I learned in India is, you can build a compound wall between house to house, or you can have a fence built around your property and the neighbor's property. But I think India, the religious practices and the way that people interact is more like you have open backyards. So I can go play in your backyard, and we can actually have a bigger backyard because we all play together.
Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately politics doesn't make that happen very well. I think that politics makes it more difficult, because it's like you have to win and I have to lose, or vice versa, right? It's an either or. And so I think that is one of the things I struggle with, is how can we do the both and? Like, I understand my colleagues in the Republican Party want smaller government, but at the same time, there are social programs that have to exist, whether it's public schools, public libraries, or other things that government provides for public safety and welfare.
Yeah.
And so government's job is to provide public safety and welfare, and to ensure public safety and welfare. And so how do you do this as a both and kind of thing, not an either or? And I think that having navigated these two countries and these two cultures, but one thing I always say to people is the Indian Constitution, the American Constitution, and the Michigan Constitution start out with something very similar. We the people.
Yeah.
All three of them. And so I actually started an organization. It's a political organization. I don't know if you can see it. Padma for the People.
Oh yeah, we can see.
Because I think it's important that this is why I decided to serve, is for the people in my district. And that's who I will always serve. And I understand navigating the extremes, because I serve a district that has a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats and a lot of independents. And so I think that helps me in understanding how to serve the district. There's a concept called third culture kid. Like, when you live in one culture, your parents are from another culture, you become a third culture kid. So I think I was a third culture kid growing up, because I had India in my home, like the Indian values, whatever those. And I think those are, some of them are common human values, like caring for the other person, somebody who is vulnerable, helping somebody in need. I don't think that's exclusive to an Indian or an American. I think that's like being compassionate towards people is something everybody should have. Being compassionate to the globe. We're in a climate crisis. You know, whether you call it Bhumi Mata or whether you call it Mother Earth, you know, be kind to the planet we live on.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, you mentioned that you studied engineering and then now you're in a political field. What were some of the challenges that you faced moving into a completely different realm?
So anytime you go into a field where there's not somebody who looks like you or who shares your background, you're shattering a glass ceiling, right? You're shattering expectations, but it also means that that's good. But at the same time, it means that you don't have anyone to mentor you. And so I think I've been very fortunate that I've had people who have mentored me who don't look like me, but I really want to help those who don't necessarily see themselves in this position, whether it's in engineering or whether it's in politics, to be able to see themselves in this space. So making it accessible. So I remember when I was in elementary school, my mother used to go to teach science as part of her coursework. She had to go into local public elementary schools when I was growing up, and she would take me with her and she would teach them little science experiments. And one of my favorites was where, you know, you'd put a glass of water and you put a piece of paper or a napkin on it, and then you quickly turn it over. And then because of the suction and the pressure, the water doesn't spill out. Have you ever done that?
Yeah.
So like my mom used to do things like that. And so to see this 5 foot tall Indian woman with a bottu and a chira coming into their school, doing that changed what they thought a person who teaches science looks like. And I think that that's something that I've always carried with me, that what my mother did, I continue to do, to try to be in places. And that's why I agreed to this interview, because I want you to see that America is not just, you know, old white men leading. There are people of all different backgrounds who are in elected office here.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Yeah, so like after years of experience as a political leader, what are some of the hardships you faced throughout the process, and what makes you the person you aspired to be when you first stepped into your position of leadership?
So I would say that leadership is not like something you step into, it's something you grow into. And I don't know that I've been in political leadership for a long time. I ran for office in 2018. I just won my second reelection. And so I think that the things I would say, the difficulties I face is being afraid. Fear makes you resist to do something. People told me like 10 years ago to run for something, but I was afraid. Like, what would people say? How would I do it? Could I do it? You know, would I fail? What would people say? Would they attack me? And they did. You know what? In 2018, when I ran for office, they attacked me and said I was going to cause $23 trillion in deficit for the United States. And they said I was radical and I had money from California liberals and I was going to, you know, I had my classmates who live in California donate money, and friends who live in California. My brother who lives in Florida donated $1,000. He's my first donor to my campaign. So I don't think that that's necessarily true. I also think that in 20, they attacked me, saying that because I wanted to enact policy so that if somebody is dangerous to themselves, that we should take their gun away, because they could commit suicide or they could harm somebody. So it's called a red flag law. And the red flag law, somebody decided that I was a radical and I was going to take away Second Amendment rights, which in the United States is the right to bear arms. And there's other words to that Second Amendment, to the Constitution. But, you know, those attacks. So I was afraid about the attacks and how people would attack my integrity. But I think that I've survived attacks both in the first election and the second election, that more people have trusted me to be their representative. I also didn't know how to enact laws. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. So that was another concern I had. But you know what? You can learn. As long as you as long as you stay interested in learning, as long as you are committed to being a lifelong learner, I think you can do anything. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt said, the future belongs to those who believe in the possibility of their dreams. And my dream is that every child has access to opportunity.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Okay, in today's world, we've seen a number of women in politics. Though this number is growing, it's still a very small, it's a substantial number to the men leaders. Do you believe everyone has been given equal rights, and that everyone's treated with the same respect?
So I'll tell you, I don't know if you know, we have a governor in Michigan. Her name is Gretchen Whitmer. And there was recently a plot to kidnap her that was revealed. And so I think that we are still struggling with treating women with the respect that they are due. That a woman leader is threatened with physical harm is unacceptable, and that the whole world isn't aware and up in arms about this. This is something that we really, and that she continues to be criticized for taking leadership to protect people from COVID-19 and protect not only the health of the public, but also to address some of the underlying issues. And so I think that, and there were attacks against me. And I don't necessarily feel that we have been protected enough. That people should, you know, I shouldn't be the one to say that the governor shouldn't have been attacked like that. More people should say things like that. And I feel sad. I think it's really important that more people step up, allies step up. I will say though, yesterday I had a campaign debrief, and we had over 475 volunteers on my campaign. And I think that that's really important. Even the first time, we had over 3,000 people who donated, over 300 people who volunteered their time and energy. Similarly, this time we had over 3,600, nearly 3,600 people who donated, and over 475 people who volunteered. I think that's something to keep in mind, is that it needs to be a groundswell. You know, I think there's some comment by Gandhiji. I don't know, like he said, if there's a woman that was raped in a village, there's nobody that should be left standing in that village. Everybody should be up in arms saying that's wrong.
Yeah.
So when something wrong happens, there should be a collective moral outrage. And so protecting women from intimidation, protecting anybody from intimidation is really important.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Congratulations for being elected again this year. Tell us how this journey has been for you so far.
Meeting young people like you has been one of the best reasons that I ran. Like, Chinna kada chaptan, Telugulo chapana? Or English? I'll tell you in English. So there was a little girl. So every year in that building, when there was no COVID, fourth graders from my school district, from where I live, they come to the Capitol from across the state. Actually, they come to the Capitol to see the Capitol. It's a historic building. It's where the legislators, it's where government, it's a public building, and people are allowed. And I came with my children when they went on their field trip. There's a little girl who came in with her teacher and her classmates, and she had two braids. My mother and so the little girl was like just jumpy and excited and just like touching everything, and they were not supposed to go outside of a certain area because it's limited. She was just kind of like all over, very hyper. And so I kind of sensed her excitement, and I was like, no, teacher, it's okay. Like, told the teacher it's okay, she can be a little hyper, it's okay. And Nivi, don't touch this. Nivi, don't do that. Teachers, Nivi, don't ask so many questions. It's like, no, it's okay. She can answer. And I will, questions make me a better legislator, right?
Yeah.
And because then I understand my own job better when you ask me questions. And so at the end of everything, we took a picture with the whole class, the whole field trip, everybody that came on the field trip. And then she pulls a little book out of her bag and she says, Representative Kupa, can you give me your autograph?
Oh.
And I was so touched. And then I looked at her and I said, Nivi, is your name Nivedita? And she said, like, her eyes just like lit up. Because, you go through life and, if you live in a country where people are not used to your names, they're not part of the common lexicon, and they mispronounce your name.
Yeah.
When somebody recognizes you and sees you and recognizes your name, and then just seeing her with the little bit, like, I just imagine, like, if I had seen someone who looked like me in office with brown skin and different name, imagine what my life would have been like. And so I'm grateful every day for the people of Troy electing me to represent them and for the people of Quasin to represent them, because that means they saw something in me that is what I said about our common humanity, that we may not agree on everything, but that we do have this common values, that we care about children and protecting the vulnerable and protecting the water, the Great Lakes. And I think so I'm grateful.
Yeah, we really appreciate this interview, and it was really inspirational for all of us, especially to see someone in office once again who is just like us. And it was a really wonderful experience, and we're sure that a bunch of rural children will be so touched by this as well. And we just wanted to thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. We have been so honored to be able to write about this. I'm sure our whole school will be bustling about it over the next week.
Yeah.
Okay. So if and when I come to India in the future, I hope to come and visit you guys there, because my parents live in Hyderabad.
Yeah,
That would be wonderful.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.